Okay, malungil silse odam. We have a special guest today with us. Engkang amle colleague nga karakara PPUC. I didn't know his stories at Akurira PPUC. It was after I left PPUC that I heard his stories. So, melang akmal Samaria excited to interview him and have him over a cup of water, and then and then we can just talk, Manny, about your
Okay.
life. So if you don't mind, Manny, if you can just begin there.
Okay.
I'll say, kau kay, adama mga algaw. But but all other belau, maybe they don't know you. Can you share with all of us? I'll say, tratar adrabli, mga adra belu, kamlukuro again. What life was like for you?
Okay. First off, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak on this forum. And if you don't mind, before we start, can I pray?
Oh, that's wonderful, yes.
So let's bow our heads for prayer. Heavenly Father, just want to thank you for the opportunity that we can come and talk together and share our stories and our testimonies and just talk about you and what you've done in our lives,
Yeah.
Lord. Lord, I just pray that you put your words in my mouth, Lord, that I may speak your message and not my own, Lord, so that those who hear this will receive the message that you want to deliver to them. Send your Holy Spirit to be with us, to enlighten our minds, Lord, for the truths that you have for us in your word and in your testimonies, Lord. Bless this establishment, bless this ministry, Lord, that it may go about and complete your work. We pray these things in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, yeah, my name is Ramon Manny Adelbai. I'm the son of Patrick Adelbai and Pam Adelbai. They stay in Idid, Koror. And so that's where our family house is in Itaringen.
Okay.
Yeah. But I was born here in 1983 at the hospital in Koror. But then when I was 5 years old, we moved to the States.
Oh,
And
your
so-
whole family.
No, just me and my mom.
Okay.
We moved to the States, and then so I grew up in the States in Montana.
Okay.
Very different surroundings than Palau. So
Obviously.
growing up like
A little bit of Montana. Is that like a cattle country? Or
yes,
what do you
yes,
think?
it is. It's a cowboy country. It's mainly white population, Caucasian. Growing up, I didn't really see any islanders, any dark-skinned people, and it's kind of funny because growing up, I kind of thought I was like white,
Oh, really?
Caucasian, because I don't have any memories before 5 years old. So all my earliest memories was mountains and streams and pastures and cows and white
Right.
people.
Okay.
And so like just me, my mom, and my brother, we were the only dark-skinned people in the whole town
Right.
of like 20,000 people.
Right.
And so it's kind of funny because looking back at some of the pictures, for my second grade picture, I was the only dark-skinned person in that picture, and I was really surprised. I was like, oh, I'm dark.
That was a surprise for you.
Yeah, but it was kind of amazing because the people of that town, they really accepted us as part of that town, and I never felt ostracized at all.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
So
Obviously it was a small community. Was it predominantly Christian, or what was the spiritual environment of that town?
yeah, I'm not so sure. Like my mom, she's Protestant, and my stepdad, who we went to go live with, he's Jewish.
Oh.
And so I grew up in like a Jewish household, but he wasn't very practicing Jew. Not that I know. So my recollection of my childhood was there was no any sort of religious impact. Actually, when I was 11, this was the only touch with religion that I ever had growing up. My mom took us to this church. She was invited to this church, and it was like me, my mom, and my brother. I was 11, he was 12, and we walked into this church, and the message that day was kind of like, if you don't tie to this church today, then you're pretty much going to hell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that was like that was the message that my mom heard walking into that church. So what did she do? She got up, took both our hands, and we left the
And
church.
you left
And that was the only contact that I ever
don't
had.
blame her. Yeah, that was a very bad introduction to a church.
Well, I mean, I guess it just so happened. I'm not so sure if that was the point of the message, or I'm pretty sure the pastor didn't mean it to say it like that, or somehow. But that was the impression that she got. And in the middle of the sermon, she just got up and left with us in tow. And that was the one and only time that I ever was in a church in my childhood.
Oh.
And so I really had no religious upbringing, and I really had no need for religion.
All right.
Yeah. Growing up and just watching the news and seeing all these hypocritical things about the church and priests and pastors that were scandals and stuff. I just kind of thought that the church really wasn't for me, and I really didn't have anything to gain from that. And so I like that saying, you just throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's exactly what I did. I had no need for the church and for the hypocrisy in there. And so I forwent the blessings and threw it all out. And so when I was 5 years old, my mom and my dad, they had split up. And so I went with my biological mom, and we went to the States. And so I lived with her, and she was Protestant, and then with my stepdad, who was Jewish. And even though I didn't see either the Jewish side or the Protestant side at all in my upbringing, it was we were very well taken care of. A middle class family, had all the stuff we needed, and it was just I can't fault anything about my childhood.
Oh, wonderful. That's good. But you say, Manny, in your testimony that you in 1995 you got into alcohol. Was it alcohol or alcohol, and then later into drugs. So with that happy childhood, what would have driven you to that lifestyle?
Oh, well, so when I was about 12, like I got into smoking cigarettes, and just so happened that that I found one, and then I smoked one like with a friend. Like we skipped school, like they go smoke in the alley, and it was just like it was
found it on the ground, or where did you find the cigarette?
I think we stole them. Like we were into just doing random stuff as kids.
Right.
Yeah. By that time, like my mom and my stepdad had split up, and so we were living with my mom, just me, my mom, and my brother, and then my older sister came. But in order to take care of us and to keep our household, my mom had to work 2 jobs, and so she worked 2 8-hour jobs, and then so she would leave really early in the mornings, before 6, and then she would come back like around 10.
Right.
Yeah, so we had
you
no
had no adult supervision.
No, we had no adult supervision growing up, and it was kind of weird. But I just remember just seeing my mom. She was always exhausted, and she'd come home 10 o'clock, and then she just asked me to rub her feet because she's a nurse and she's on her feet all day.
Wow.
And so she works. She worked as a licensed practical nurse,
Right.
16 hours a day. So whenever she came home, she just asked me to always rub her feet. So that was one of the things I remember. It was just whenever she got home, I would rub her feet. But that was 10, 11 o'clock, and then.
How did that impact you as a young boy?
Well, the fact that I didn't have any supervision, it just it wasn't a good thing, because I got really infatuated early with drugs, cigarettes, and weed and alcohol.
Was that through your friends at school?
Maybe not the friends at school, but more like the neighborhood around.
Oh,
because after we finished there were no extracurricular activities, and so after school ended at 3, it was from 3 to around 10, where we did whatever we wanted.
Right.
And so sometimes walking around and once I started smoking cigarettes, I always would actually go and find areas where the building, the office buildings where people like everyday workers would come out and they'd have their smoke break.
Right.
I would wait for the smoke break and then I'd go and grab their cigarettes at the end of them and then go in some alley and like I was very infatuated with it, and that's
Right.
kind of how I grew up.
Mm.
And like I had no like on top of that I had no contact with the Bible, religion, any sort of moral stuff. So it just didn't. The only impact that I had was maybe media, and it wasn't the best.
Right, it wasn't a good picture
No.
for you.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your mom didn't know all this that you were going through at that time.
No.
She
No.
didn't know.
No.
Because you presented a good boy at home, but out in the neighborhood you were, living a different lifestyle.
Well, yes, but it wasn't like I was living two different phases. I was exactly who I was,
Okay.
But my mom just never knew about it, and she never had time
She
to
was
interact.
too exhausted.
Yeah, and like actually, I remember sometimes like I would actually be smoking in the bathroom, and then she caught me, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And that's not good for you, and everything. And so, I mean, well, my mom did the best that she could
Right.
with under the circumstances that were presented her,
Right.
and
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So yeah, I think it had a lot to do with just not having any supervision after school,
Right.
and
not having a father figure during
Yeah.
those critical teenage years of your
yes,
life.
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, the father figure stuff is really important, and I
Right.
ended up I ended up getting some pretty messed up male figures that were in the neighborhood that did a lot of a lot of drugs and partying and sex and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and it wasn't a good environment to grow up in,
Yeah.
but that's how it was.
And these are white people.
Yeah.
They're because still maybe stereotype or o singiran adawa si I get the lifestyle of all the other nationalities. They are whites of all. And again, you see, it just depends on the upbringing and then they get into that lifestyle and it becomes a bondage for them.
Yeah, well, because you talk about like whites, Caucasians, and stuff, but then
Yeah.
even in that society, the society we lived in was all white. But then you have different levels, different classes, and
Right.
since we didn't have the type of means to afford really good housing, we had to live sort of in the kind of lower, the cheaper sections of the city,
Right.
and which were kind of slummy.
Right.
And like the kind of term there was like they call that like white trash neighborhoods. And so just all the people who had really low incomes, and it was kind of like a projects or barracks.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of the housing that we grew up in, just apartments where the cheapest places were.
Right.
And so that kind of congregated the bad
Right.
characters.
Right. How did that impact your school? Your schooling?
Oh yeah, my school, like I didn't have, I never really was into school, actually. The only, it's kind of weird because I remember when I was like 11 or 12, I remember I really looked up to my mom, and I was pretty much a mama's boy growing up. And I asked her, I was like, Mom, when I grow up, I want to marry a woman just like you. And so like, how can I attract a woman just like you? And what she told me was that like, what really attracted her to my father was his education. He was an educated man, and he was smart. And so I was like, okay, so I'm gonna be an educated man and be smart. Like that was kind of like that was the start of my drive to trying to learn how to better myself and to do well in school. But this was before the drugs started happening, and then I started and I was really into school and really into math and sciences. But then after that, when I was into drugs, I just didn't really care about that much anymore. And
You mean school?
I didn't really care so much about school. But the thing was, I was able to really good at taking tests, and so I just made sure that I passed my tests. And I'm not sure if my grades ever went down because of that. But I was more into drugs than into school.
Right. But you were able to graduate, and
Yeah.
then
Because the thing with the school system is the subject matter is relatively easy. I mean, I imagine it's even more so here in Palau, but like we had in Montana at that time, that specific curriculum was a really highly rated elementary curriculum, and it was easy. And so I imagine like students going through schools they're not very challenged here. Like it doesn't take a lot to absorb the material and to just pass your classes on just the tests alone.
Right. So, Manny, but until Bayor Kawakoro was, I say there was a point in time that they kick you out, Ramrigel.
Oh yeah.
What happened there?
So yeah, like I started making those bad decisions, like I said, in 1995, and it just continued. I was always really good at taking tests, so all throughout high school, I kind of just skipped out on most of the classes. But whenever it came time to take the tests, I would go and take them and pass, and I would pass on the tests alone. But I spent most of my time outside and with bad company. And then like in 2001, I graduated. And then I started to go to this tech school for computer information technology. And then like on September 10th of 2001, I was kicked out of the school because of my passport had expired. Because since 1988 until 2001, I had never renewed my passport because I thought I was an American because I grew up in America.
Right.
And like we had the Compact of Free Association, so there was no issues of green cards or whatever.
Right.
But so I didn't know that my passport had expired like 15 years prior to 2001.
Wow.
And so I get kicked out of the college because they found out my passport was expired, and it's been expired for like countless years.
Okay.
And this was September 10th.
Okay.
And so that was kind of like a hard hit to me. And then the very next day was September 11th, 2001, when the Twin Towers fell.
Right.
And during that time, like being kicked out of school, and then that I was really tied into media, and then that sort of thing happened. It kind of just messed me up and threw me into kind of a depression for like a couple years. So at the time when I was in the depression, I like was in my apartment, and I wouldn't shower. I wouldn't go out of my apartment for like months. And
Wow.
yeah, like whenever people would try and like come to my house and like knock on my door, I would like run, flee into the furthest corner of my house and just hide until they stopped knocking or until the phone stopped ringing.
Right.
And like it was kind of a deep depression like that. And that lasted for almost a year.
Wow.
And then during that time, one of the guys that kept coming knocking on my door, and then like eventually like I was able to talk to him, and he kind of got me to come out. And but what happened was when we go out doing like stealing stuff, robberies, and like staking out businesses and houses, and like breaking and entering, and stealing, burglary, all that stuff. And that was kind of the thing that got me out of the depression, which was kind of weird, right? Because I was like getting back into a society, getting back into contact with other people, but it was the wrong group.
Crowd.
Yeah, and so like this was 2002, the end of 2002, and then one night we were drinking, and we decided to do robberies, which we usually don't do when we're drunk. And that's when it was really kind of dumb, because like we would there was a street here, and we like robbed this place, and then we robbed this place, and we robbed this place, and then we turned around and drove back through the neighborhood. And when we were driving through the neighborhood, the cops had already called, and then the cops were en route on that same road. And so like that's kind of like a stupid thing that we were doing because we were drunk, and like why did we drive back the same way that right across? And they're like, oh, there's there's the car, and there are those people. And so we got arrested then, and then I ended up arrested for like robbery and kidnapping, like 2 counts robbery, 2 counts kidnapping that day.
Kidnapping?
Yeah.
Did you take the
So like they call it kidnapping because you move someone against their will to do stuff. And so like when we did a robbery, we like the codes to the safe were in some other part, so we had to go take him to that part and bring him back to open up the safe to get the cash and whatever. And so that's considered robbery. And so there was like 2 counts of robbery, 2 counts of kidnapping. And so then that was in 2002, 2003 was convicted of that. And then I spent about 10 months in jail, got out on probation. And then like this was 2003, at the end of 2003, I spent 2 years on probation, rehabilitating, going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and just trying to rehabilitate back into society so I could be a member of society.
Is this required by the court?
Yes.
Your own choice?
So, oh yeah, you're talking about the turning point. So I guess I was kind of getting to the turning point.
No. At that point in time when you were still in the States and you were arrested, and then you entered into that program, that rehabilitation program. Was that your own choice, or was that dictated by the court? So
the probation program was instituted by the courts.
Okay.
Because it was kind of like they called it the IPS, in prison or intensive probation services. Okay. So you go onto IPS, and it's kind of like the last stop before you go and do your term. Like when I walked into the sentencing room, like I was looking at I had 4 counts of class 4 felonies, and they each carried a max sentence of 7 years. So I was walking into the sentencing room looking at 28 years, and it was very scary. But I was only sentenced to like 7 years, and with 3 years of probation. And so they put me on.
What does that mean? 3 years of probation?
So for the first 7 years, you put on probation.
Yeah.
So and if you can complete the probation, then that 3 years counts for the 7 years. So like, but if you don't
behave well,
if I behave well and I stay in probation, I can be on probation for 3 years, and that would count for the 7 years. But if I fail in those 3 years, then I go and I serve the full 7 years.
Right.
That's how the plea bargain ended up being.
Right. And when you walked into the sentencing, was that like a wake-up call for you? Did you sort of go, what happened to my life? Why am I here? What's my life going to end up like?
I wasn't really thinking about that. For me, like it was kind of just my head was kind of messed up, and like kind of the turning point that I would say that happened was I was sitting in the jail cell, and like I was in what they call a pod, and it looks like it's like a bunch of cells around a larger room, right? And so that's what they call a pod. And so when you're in your own cell, it's a really small cell. Like I could touch both walls like this.
Wow. So
like that, and then it's like 10 feet ceiling. So that was the cell that I was in, and you were locked up in there for like 22 hours a day. And then for the other 2 hours, you're in a larger room that was connected to it. They call it the day room. And so it was a very restricted time, a very restricted area, and like I just hated being there.
Okay.
And then like then this one time the CEO came and was like, he was just like, hey, there's the AA meetings, and I'm like, where are they? And they're like, oh, you have to go to the other building. So I was just like, you mean I can leave this pod and go through all these doors and go to another building? And so I was like, sign me up, I want to go.
Right.
The whole purpose of me going to that AA meeting was to get out of that pod.
Right.
Like I hated being there, and it was just so locked up and crammed, and just the thought of going to another building was just like very, very welcoming.
Right.
And so that was the incentive for me to enter the AA program.
Right.
When I first started the AA program, that was my incentive.
Right.
But that was the turning point. It was kind of weird how that happened, because the very first time I read the Bible was during that first month period when I was locked up in that pod. I remember I was talking about my experience to some cellmate, like a tall, dark African guy, and he was going to just tell me, he's like, oh, I have this book that I want you to read. And I was just like, book? What book? And so he gave me this book, and it was really thick. It was like this big. I'm like, how am I supposed to read this book? I mean, I like reading, but I'm not going to read this book for you. And he's like, no, it's only a few pages. And so he turned, and the book was a Bible. And the book that he turned to was the book of Proverbs.
Oh, Proverbs.
Yeah, Proverbs. And he was just like, hey, you should read this book. It has all these like really cool sayings, and they're very true. And I was just like, what is this? And I remember just reading through this stuff. I'm like, wow, this stuff is so amazing. Like, I've never seen it. But then I remember reading, he's just like, yeah, pay attention to the ones where it says, a fool is this, a fool is that, a fool is this. And I was just like, what? So I would look up for all the word where it says, a fool is this, a fool is that. And it's just like, then there's just like, a fool says in his heart there is no God. And I'm like, whoa, that's me. And then I'm like, does that mean I'm a fool? I was like, is this book trying to tell me I'm a fool? And at first I was kind of offended, right? I was just like, well, who the heck wrote this? And then he was telling me, oh, this was written by Solomon. And I'm like, who the heck is Solomon? And he's like, he was the wisest king that ever lived in Israel. And I was like, what? The wisest man is telling me that I'm a fool? Like, I was just really getting angry at this book. But eventually I started reading more of it, and like so many of those things that a fool does this, a fool is this, a fool is this, I really resonated with. And I was just like, man, does that mean I'm a fool? And like, but isn't a fool a cool thing? Because we're always like, what's up, fool? We always said that in the streets. What's up, fool? Yeah, like we called each other fool.
Wow.
And so like on the streets, like a fool wasn't a bad thing. It was kind of like homie, friend.
Right.
So what's up, fool? Right. And then I remember one time, like during that period, I said, "What's up, fool?" to a friend, and he's like, "Hey, I ain't a fool, fool. I ain't a fool, fool."
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really just like the kind of concept, like my thoughts around that word and around religion, because already I was biased against religion, and I was biased against the Bible and anything that had to do with religion. And so, yeah, it's kind of a funny thing to be talking about now, because it's such a different lifestyle, a different world than now.
Wow, that's amazing. And so in that time, and you attend the AA meeting, is that when you got more exposed into spiritual truths? Do they share the Word of God at the AA meetings, or?
No. AA is a kind of a different thing. I really, AA is not a Christian denomination or anything, but they're spiritual.
Okay.
And so that was kind of my first exposure to spiritual concepts and spiritual things, and they kind of believe in like a God that is greater than myself, and it can be anything. Right? It's different than Christianity, where Jesus Christ is God.
Right.
So that was different. And like some of the meetings, for me, when I first started in AA, like God was the AA meeting that I went to. It's the group conscience, and so that's kind of how I was exposed to those things.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, but I remember like towards the end of my work furlough, like I had been sentenced to 180 days of work furlough, where you're locked up, and you're locked up from 6 to 6, but then from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. you can go out and look for work and stuff.
Right.
And so we were coming back in on
6 to 6
yeah. So I was coming back, and then I was in my orange jumpsuits that they had for Pima County, and I remember waiting to get in, and I was talking to this one guy, and he was just like, if you notice that every single person that leaves this place, they come back. And then I was thinking about, this had already been 9 months into being there, and I remember in the first month when I got there, I remember seeing these guys like, hey, I'm going out, I'll see you guys later, forget you guys, and like I'd be watching them leave the pod, and I was just like, man, I want to leave like that guy, I don't want to be here, and they were just so happy to leave in the first month, but within 2 months, I saw that guy back again. And it seemed like every time someone left the pod, they were back like very soon or within a month or so. And the only ones that didn't return, like I heard that they were killed in like gang related stuff. And so like going back to, how I was saying I was on IPS in intensive probation service, but in the actual intensive probation service, among the people who were there, IPS stood for in prison soon. Because everyone I knew who got onto IPS, they weren't able to stay on there. Right. Remember how I say you have to finish 3 years, and if you don't finish 3 years, you have to serve your 7?
Yes.
Everyone that I knew that got into IPS on those 3 years served the 7.
Wow.
They weren't able to complete the 3
I
years.
see.
And so I was very scared. I was like, I don't want to be like that.
Right.
And I was just, I have no idea how, but I know that every single person I know that has left this pod came back.
Right.
And so when I was coming back on the work photo, and that guy kind of said, you know, you think you're going to be going, but you're just going to be back.
Oh.
He's like, don't think you're any better than any one of us, because
Right.
you're going to be back.
Right.
And that was kind of,
Discouraging.
it was discouraging, and that was one of those times where I was just like, I do not want to be like that. And I guess I kind of just said, God help me.
Mhm.
I do not want to be like that. And I guess I kind of just said, God help me.
Mhm.